The movie starts with a young boy named Ji Young. He's at a court trial because his mom was killed. The person who did it is a man named Song-soo. Now Song-soo is in trouble with the law. But Song-soo already said sorry and admitted he had some mental problems. So the judge decides to send Song-soo to prison for 3.5 years. Ji Young feels really sad when he hears this. He thinks it's not fair that Song-soo only gets a short prison time, even though he did something really bad to Ji Young's mom. When Song-soo is taken away to prison, he smirks at Ji Young for a moment. Fast forward 12 years, Song-soo is out of prison, and he does something terrible by attacking a bus driver over a small issue. After hurting the bus driver, Song-soo notices a strange guy staring at him from far away. He gets really annoyed when this guy follows him into a narrow alley. The mysterious man introduces himself as Ji Young, the son of the lady Song-soo murdered a long time ago. Without wasting any time, Ji Young seeks revenge on Song-soo and ends up killing him. Soon after, Ji Young goes back home and looks at an old photo of him and his mom when he was a kid. We also learn that Ji Young often takes the law into his own hands, especially when criminals avoid punishment or get light sentences. A little while later, there's this experienced police officer called Jun Yap, and he's teaching at the police academy. What's surprising is that Ji Young is now a student there too. Ji Young has a question for Jun Yap about why some serious criminals seem to get away with light punishments from the police. Jun Yap says it might be because of a lack of evidence, or even because some cops can be influenced. After their classes, Ji Young hits the police gym to train in judo. Jun Yap notices Ji Young's skills and thinks he's ready to solve real cases out there. Also, every weekend, the police academy students get to go back home. Ji Young gets ready to head home and meets up with his friends, Song-nook and Hwang Jun. The three of them are very close because they share a room in the police dormitory and are all going through police training together. When Ji Young gets back home, he turns out to be a really friendly and helpful guy. He's always there for his neighbors when they need a hand. After lending a hand to one of his neighbors, he goes inside his house and chills while watching the news on TV. In the news, they talk about these two guys who beat up another man so badly that he's now disabled. These two troublemakers are after a house, and they've even gotten away with murder before. Ji Young hears about this and quickly jumps on his computer to dig into the case and find out the address of the house desired by the two criminals. Later on, those two guys are causing trouble again, this time scaring a woman and her son, trying to force them out of their home. These two bullies had already hurt the woman's husband, as we heard earlier. They were being really nasty to the family, even urinating on their house, when out of nowhere, Ji Young shows up and takes care of those two troublemakers and killed both of them. After getting back home, Ji Young hears about a rich plastic surgeon who did terrible things. This surgeon was involved in lewd activities and repeatedly harmed his patients while secretly recording it. Shockingly, he only got a 6-month prison sentence, and they didn't even take away his medical license. When this surgeon was thinking about going back to his wicked ways, Ji Young suddenly shows up and gives him a beatdown, breaking the surgeon's hand. But Ji Young doesn't go as far as killing the guy. Instead, he tells the surgeon to quit his practice right away. Ji Young makes it clear that if the surgeon doesn't stop, he won't hesitate to finish him off. The next day, a journalist with red hair, Choi Mir-yo, had a meeting with her boss, Chung Yeon. She excitedly told him that she had some amazing news ready for TV. Surprisingly, it was all about the things Ji Young had been up to. Mir-yo explained that there was a mysterious guy out there who had been taking the law into his own hands. She said this guy was doing it because he believed the legal system in the country was really weak and favored the rich, so he decided to step in and fill that gap. Mir-yo wanted to call this mysterious guy Vigilante. But nobody knew who this Vigilante really was, not even Mir-yo herself. When Mir-yo's news came out, it caused a big stir all over South Korea. Lots of people were on the Vigilante's side, thinking he was doing the right thing, but the cops didn't like it at all. Ji Young and his two buddies also heard about it, and even though they were training to be police officers, they supported what the Vigilante was doing. The next day, in the journalist's office where Mir-yo worked, she saw her whole team super excited because their company had gotten really high ratings for reporting on The Vigilant. MyRio mentioned that their ratings would keep going up because The Vigilant was likely to do something every weekend. Meanwhile, Ji Yong was on the lookout for cases where the law hadn't done its job. He came across a case involving a guy named Chi Hien, who had killed someone in a hit and run but hadn't been arrested. A little later, there was a woman who was yelling at Chi Hien because his actions had caused her husband to die in that hit and run, but Chi Hien kept saying sorry and promised not to drink and drive again. Surprisingly, Ji Yong was already there, ready to teach Chi Hien a lesson. However, when he heard that Chi Hien was truly sorry and had apologized, Ji Yong decided not to punish him. Meanwhile, MyRio and Chung Yon were scratching their heads because there was no news to report, as The Vigilant or Ji Yong hadn't done anything that weekend. After chatting with Chung Yon, MyRio finally had an idea. They could try to bait The Vigilant by revisiting a case from 2015. Back in 2015, there was a guy who committed a terrible crime, but because the law was weak, he remained a free man until now. MyRio believed that if they'd brought this case back into the spotlight, The Vigilant would likely target the perpetrator next. So, MyRio told the TV presenter to bring back the news about the 2015 case, even showing the photo of the perpetrator, Dog Yong, along with his address. On the other side, Ji Yong was also keeping an eye on the news. The following day, the news that MyRio had created spread, and some residents started protesting in front of Dog Yong's house. They were furious that Dog Yong hadn't received a fair punishment. On the other hand, Dog Yong neighbors showed up at the window and shouted at the protesters for disturbing them. Meanwhile, Dog Yong was munching on food while watching TV. One rainy night, with a quiet atmosphere around him, Dog Yong hatched a secret plan to make a getaway using a pickup truck. He made his way to a dock. What he didn't expect was that MyRio continued to keep a close eye on him and hastily trailed behind. However, when they arrived at the dock area, MyRio lost sight of Dog Yong. The problem was there were quite a few pickup trucks there, and it was tricky to spot which one Dog Yong had used. The following day, mounting public pressure finally forced the police to pay a visit to Dog Yong's house, but to their dismay, Dog Yong wasn't there. Soon enough, some officers received a tip suggesting that Dog Yong was at a dock, planning his escape. Armed with this information, the police hurried to the dock, assigning 2 officers to keep watch over the victim's house, the one who had suffered at Dog Yong's hands. Meanwhile, at the dock, the police scoured every ship in the area in search of Dog Yong. MyRio and Chung Yon were on standby, ready to report the news and ensure their media outlet got the first scoop on Dog Yong's capture. But that night, despite their efforts, the police still couldn't locate Dog Yong because of the multitude of ships at the dock. Meanwhile, one of the police officers who had been guarding the victim's house was called in to help with the search at the dock, leaving the other officer on duty at the victim's place. Before long, Dog Yong showed up at the victim's house, wearing a helmet and pretending to be a courier. But the sharp-eyed police officer grew suspicious right away, and a confrontation ensued between him and Dog Yong. Surprisingly, Dog Yong splashed scalding liquid on the police officer's face, leaving him incapacitated. At the same time, the girl who had been the victim emerged from the scene, and Dog Yong quickly dragged her away. As they were going down the stairs, Dog Yong was furious with the girl, thinking that she had drawn attention to his case. Just as Dog Yong was about to harm the girl, Ji Yong arrived just in the nick of time. Without any hesitation, Ji Yong took down Dog Yong. After severely injuring him, Ji Yong instructed Dog Yong to write something on the wall before ultimately finishing him off. Shortly after that, the police arrived and MyRio entered the scene, pretending to live in the apartment. As she climbed the stairs, MyRio couldn't help but smile because Vigilant had taken the bait when she saw the message Dog Yong had written on the wall using his own blood. The message made it clear that Vigilant would act as the judge for those who were evil and unjust. On the flip side, Ji Yong had changed his attire and was strolling casually through the city. He had made a commitment to continue his role as Vigilant because he believed that South Korea's legal system couldn't be trusted completely, and he saw himself as filling the gaps in that system. At the same time, the news of Do Hyung's demise at the hands of Vigilant once again stirred up a commotion in South Korea. A majority of the public sided with Vigilant because, indirectly, he had aided the powerless who hadn't received justice through legal means. On the contrary, the police were furious at Vigilant for taking the law into his own hands. In fact, the chief of police in Incheon promptly declared Vigilant as the most wanted fugitive. Sometime later, the chief of police in Incheon instructed Jun Yap to join the investigation at the location where Do Hyung was killed. Jun Yap asked Ji Young and So Nu to lead a discussion with the other students as he had his duties to attend to. When Jun Yap arrived at the scene, he couldn't find any leads and began to think that Vigilant had a deep understanding of police operations. Not long after, a young girl approached them, puzzled by why the police were treating Vigilant as a fugitive when many people actually supported what Vigilant was doing more than they supported the police. Meanwhile, Mirio and Chung Yeon were feeling the heat from law enforcement because their media outlet appeared to be endorsing Vigilant's actions. However, Mirio explained to her team that the most crucial thing was to maintain high ratings for their media company. In fact, she had already set up a situation where a criminal would act as bait to lure Vigilant into continuing his actions. Sometime later, Ji Young, So Noog, and Hwang Jun were working out and talking about Vigilant. So Noog mentioned that Vigilant's intelligence and skills were nearly as impressive as Ji Young's. Ji Young didn't say anything in response, knowing that he was, in fact, Vigilant himself. Before long, there was breaking news from Mirio, which highlighted a man named Do Yap involved in a gruesome crime where he brutally murdered an entire family, including 2 young children. Sadly, Do Yap had an underage teenager named Song Yul with him during the crime, and he tried to blame it all on the young boy. However, Song Yul received a lenient punishment due to his age. That evening, Ji Young, who took a keen interest in the case, immediately started investigating Do Yap using the police computer. He also checked out the social media profiles of both Do Yap and Song Yul, who had been released. Ji Young discovered that the two of them frequently hung out at a nightclub. When the weekend came, Ji Young, So Nu, and Hwang Jun prepared to go out. So Nu and Hwang Jun suggested hitting up a nightclub for some fun, as Ji Young had never been interested in such places before. Surprisingly, Ji Young agreed to join his friends at the nightclub, but his real motive was to locate Do Yap, who frequented the establishment. It didn't take long for Ji Young to spot Do Yap relaxing with Song Yul. Out of the blue, a woman found Ji Young handsome and invited him for a drink. While Ji Young chatted with the woman, he kept an eye and an ear on Do Yap, who was deep in conversation with Song Yul. Do Yap explained to Song Yul how easily the law in South Korea could be manipulated. He had intentionally dragged Song Yul into a heinous crime, framing him as the main culprit in the brutal murder of a family. This cunning move allowed Do Yap to receive a light sentence, while Song Yul, being underage, got away without facing any consequences. Ji Young, upon hearing this, seethed with anger and decided that Do Yap needed to be dealt with. However, the woman he was with noticed Ji Young's focus on Do Yap and led him to a quiet spot, thinking that Ji Young was interested in the drugs Do Yap was involved with. It was there that Ji Young learned that Do Yap was indeed a drug dealer. The woman seduced Ji Young, making him feel drowsy and drunk, which prevented him from dealing with Do Yap. Later, when Ji Young returned to the dormitory after the weekend, he came across photos of 2 children who had been brutally murdered by Do Yap. This prompted Ji Young to dig deeper into Do Yap's involvement in drug trafficking. However, Do Yap was always careful and managed to avoid getting caught. In the following weekend, Ji Young decided to tail Do Yap. He discovered that Do Yap often conducted his shady dealings in a secluded area near the river. Do Yap even stored his drugs in a small house by the river. Meanwhile, Chung Yeon grew anxious because Vigilant hadn't taken any action for 3 weeks. Mirio reassured Chung Yeon, suggesting that Vigilant might be laying low, especially after being declared a fugitive. As for Do Yap, after his night at the nightclub, he discovered a note attached to his car. It startled him when he read the message, which told him to surrender by calling a phone number provided on the paper. Du Yap asked Song Yul to make the call and find out more. After dialing the number, Song Yul informed Du Yap that it belonged to the National Narcotics Enforcement Agency of South Korea. When Du Yap returned to the nightclub, panic set in as the police suddenly showed up for a search. Luckily, Du Yap managed to escape and headed to a small house near the river where he stored all his drugs. However, when he got there, he realized that Ji Yong had already taken everything. Du Yap tried to attack Ji Yong, but Ji Yong swiftly defeated him and burned all of Du Yap's drugs. Ji Yong urged Du Yap to repent, but Du Yap refused, leading Ji Yong to severely beat him until he was nearly dead. Before ending Du Yap's life, Ji Yong showed him a video of the two children who had been murdered by Du Yap. The next day, Du Yap's lifeless body was discovered, shocking both the police and the public. More and more people began to support Vigilant, which angered the police. The chief of police in Incheon announced that the public should not support Vigilant, calling him a criminal they were pursuing. He also requested help from the Central Police. Meanwhile, many TV stations hosted discussions about Vigilant. Some criticized him for human rights reasons, but others supported him, saying he was a result of law enforcement's failure to deliver justice. Chung Yeon and his team celebrated their success as their company benefited from the high ratings generated by Vigilante. My Rio reminded them not to relax because they needed to keep using the Vigilant case to maintain high media ratings. Since Vigilant started his actions, the crime rate had dropped significantly, and many criminals had turned themselves in. One police officer told his colleague that the Central Police, known as Johan or the Monster, would be leading the operation to capture Vigilante. Later on, Johan was seen interrogating Song Yul aggressively. He asked Song Yul if he had ever suspected someone who might be Vigilant. Song Yul mentioned a young man at the nightclub who had been closely observing them, suggesting he could be Vigilant. After getting this information, Johan let Song Yul go and contacted the central office, expressing his determination to capture Vigilant, dead or alive. A little while later, there were people who started copying Vigilant. They started dealing with bad guys in their own way, which was pretty different from Ji Yong. Because Ji Yong always wanted to figure out why someone did wrong stuff and could forgive them if they felt sorry. But those who copied him, they were pretty tough on the bad guys without even checking if they did something wrong first. Because a lot of people were copying Vigilante, the media quickly thought that it was happening because people didn't trust the police anymore. The Monster, who's also known as Johan, got really mad when he saw the news. He wanted to catch the real Vigilant fast. According to him, Vigilant was just a criminal pretending to be a hero. Ji Yong, who was watching the news too, didn't seem too happy about people copying his actions without thinking. Sean Wook said that folks were copying Vigilant because the media kept talking about him, not really Vigilant's fault. Ji Yong replied that none of this would have happened if the cops did a better job protecting the victims. The next day, Johan asked his fellow police officers to keep searching for the real Vigilant, even though it was getting harder with more people copying him. Johan also said that now, criminals were more scared of Vigilant than the cops. The day after that, Mei Rio seemed like she was trying to get the real Vigilant to do something. She shared news about a truck driver named Ju Ho, who killed a deliveryman, and Ji Yong quickly reacted to the news. At first, Ji Yong tried to check the CCTV footage of what happened with Ju Ho and the deliveryman. In the video, Ju Ho accidentally hit the deliveryman, but instead of taking him to the hospital, Ju Ho intentionally got back in his truck and ran over him until he died. He did it on purpose to avoid paying the medical bills. While Ji Yong was watching the video, Seon Wook surprised him by catching him in the act. Ji Yong quickly made up an excuse, saying he was just organizing work files. But Seon Wook didn't fully trust his explanation and thought Ji Yong might be hiding something. On the following day, which happened to be a holiday, Ju Ho faced the wrath of the deliveryman's angry mother because he seemed to have gotten away with his crime against her son. Even though Ju Ho intentionally killed her son, he arrogantly yelled at and pushed her, showing no remorse. Ji Yong, who was nearby, witnessed this incident. Later that night, Ju-ho was chilling in a hot spring when a fake vigilant suddenly showed up and killed him without giving him a chance to repent. However, this wasn't the real vigilant, because Ji-young was busy helping his neighbor sort scrap materials. His neighbor, an elderly woman named Ah-ra, thanked him for always being so helpful. At the same time, Ji-young saw the news about Ju-ho's death, and the person responsible claimed to be vigilante. A little while later, Jo-han was at the crime scene where Ju-ho was killed. After checking things out, Jo-han figured out that the one who did it wasn't vigilant, because their methods were totally different. Meanwhile, another media company, Maerio's rival, started reporting on the fake vigilante's actions. They even tried to lure Vigilant by letting out 3 just-freed criminals. But Maerio realized that the Vigilant from yesterday wasn't the real one. Soon after, the fake Vigilant saw the news from the rival media company and didn't waste any time. They coldly killed those 3 recently released criminals and sent a video to the media, saying they keep doing their thing. Jo-han got even more furious after seeing Vigilant's message. He wanted to catch Vigilant immediately, didn't matter if it was the real one or the fake one. Meanwhile, Ji-young was upset because the heartless actions of the fake Vigilant were damaging his reputation as the real Vigilant. A few days later, Ji-young's neighbor, Ah-ra, got yelled at by a guy named Sun-do just because she was in his way. Ah-ra tried to move her cart, but Sun-do was so impatient and heartless that he ran over Ah-ra, and she passed away. A store owner saw the whole thing and got into it with Sun-do, but when the cops showed up, they arrested the store owner for getting physical with Sun-do, and Sun-do got taken to the hospital. The next day, Ji-young found out about this and got super mad, especially since Ah-ra was his neighbor, and he wasn't the only one angry. Sun-wook also got furious after hearing the news. When the holiday came, Wang-jun invited Son-noob to go party at a nightclub, but he refused, mentioning some stuff he had to deal with. Ji-young also turned down the invitation. On the other hand, Maerio told her colleagues that the real Vigilant would probably go after the guy who killed Ah-ra, so she asked them to watch the hospital where Sun-do was. Meanwhile, Sun-do was in a hospital room with just one cop guarding him. Then, the cop got a call about his car in the parking lot, saying it got hit. So he rushed out to check, leaving Sun-do alone. When the cop left, Ji-young showed up and attacked Sun-do right away. Ji-young told him he'd forgive him if he confessed to all his crimes during the trial. But if he didn't, Ji-young said he'd come back to deal with him. A little later, Jo-han arrived and had a talk with Ji-young. As Ji-young was walking away outside, suddenly Sun-do fell from a window and died on the spot. The one who did it was the fake vigilante. Ji-young saw the fake vigilant making a quick getaway from the hospital and hopping into an ambulance. Ji-young chased after him until he could get into his car. But instead of being scared, the fake vigilant seemed pretty happy to meet Ji-young finally, because he already knew who Ji-young was. Later, the fake vigilant stopped the ambulance in a quiet spot and said he wanted to team up with Ji-young, offering to help with their actions. But Ji-young wasn't happy about it and attacked the fake vigilant, leading to a fight. Turns out, the fake vigilante knew martial arts almost as well as Ji-young, but in the end, Ji-young got the upper hand. He told the fake vigilant to stop copying him. Meanwhile, Maerio managed to record Ji-young in action, and she figured out who the real vigilant was. Back at home, Ji-young got a message from the fake vigilant asking if he needed an alibi for the injuries on his face. Those injuries could cause trouble for Ji-young when he went back to the police academy. But Ji-young just ignored the message. The next day, a conglomerate named Gung-og showed up. He was a young and powerful guy with many large companies. Shockingly, he was the same fake vigilant Ji-young met the night before. Gung-og came to the company where Maerio worked because he heard she had recorded the real vigilant in action. As he walked around, everybody treated Gung-og with a lot of respect. When he met Maerio, he said he came to protect the vigilant's identity and thought Maerio admired what Vigilant did. Maerio asked him why he wanted to keep the vigilant's identity secret, and Gung-og said she'd find out the reason eventually. Then he took a flash drive with recordings of the vigilant from Maerio. Meanwhile, Jo-han was at the police academy to meet Professor Jun Yap. While he was walking around, he accidentally ran into Ji-young again. Ji-young got nervous because Jo-han was the guy he saw at the hospital, and Jo-han remembered Ji-young's face too. Not long after, Jo-han met up with Jun Yap and told him that the real vigilante might be a cop. Jo-han asked Jun Yap for information on all his students, and they had a long talk about Vigilant. Later that day, when Jun Yap was about to teach, he took attendance and noticed Ji-young's bruised face. Jun Yap asked Ji-young about his injuries, but Ji-young made up a story about having a judo match with his neighbor during the recent break. However, Jun Yap knew about Ji-young's judo skills and didn't believe him. While in the classroom, a staff member came in and told Jun Yap that a cop wanted to see Ji-young. Ji-young got nervous upon hearing this. But when Ji-young and Jun Yap met the cop, it turned out the officer just wanted to introduce Ji-young to a girl named Young-ji who wanted to thank him. Young-ji said Ji-young saved her from some bullies who bothered her the night before. At first, Ji-young didn't get why Young-ji was doing this, but he realized she might be working for Gung-ok, the fake vigilante. Ji-young then admitted that he got his injuries from fighting while helping Young-ji, and Jun Yap stopped suspecting him. That night, when Ji-young was alone, he finally replied to Gung-ok's message and agreed to meet up next week. Gung-ok was thrilled to get Ji-young's message because he admired Ji-young for a long time. A few days later, Mei-ryo got a visit from her old friend, a journalist named Dae-sok. Dae-sok told Mei-ryo that a mafia boss named Sum-do had just been released, even though he did a bunch of bad stuff. All the evidence against Sum-do was in the hands of a celebrity named Jae-huk, and Jae-huk was going to reveal all the evidence on Sum-do the next day. So Dae-sok invited Mei-ryo to go with him to meet Jae-huk the next morning. On the other hand, Sum-do, who had just got out of prison, was on his way to meet two guys who had snitched on him to the cops. He ordered his henchmen to give those two beaten-up guys to some hungry pigs. The next morning, Mei-ryo and Dae-sok went to the place of Jae-huk, who was planning to reveal Sum-do's crimes. But when they got there, they found Jae-huk already dead. They reported it to the police, but the officers who checked the scene said Jae-huk died after do the unthinkable, not murder. Mei-ryo tried to explain how Jae-huk was connected to Sum-do, the recently freed mafia boss. But the cops still didn't believe her story. Outside, Mei-ryo told Dae-sok they needed to investigate the case themselves. She was sure that the person who killed Jae-huk was part of Sum-do's gang. Meanwhile, Ji-young and his two friends had just reached the bus station and were heading home. Not long after, Young-ji, the girl who said Ji-young helped her yesterday, came up to him. Ji-young figured out that Young-ji was the girl sent by Gung-ok. So Ji-young left with Young-ji. But while they were walking, Ji-young noticed Jo-han following him closely. He asked Young-ji to wait for him while he quickly went to the restroom. Just as Ji-young was heading to the restroom, Jo-han suddenly showed up in front of him. Jo-han didn't waste any time and asked Ji-young if he knew about Vigilant. Ji-young tried to stay cool and said he knew about Vigilant because it was all over the news. He even mentioned that he often wrote reports about Vigilant for Jun Yap. But Jo-han questioned how Vigilant could be writing reports about himself. Jo-han got closer and threatened Ji-young, warning him that if he kept doing what he was doing, Jo-han wouldn't hesitate to take him out. Realizing that his secret was out, Ji-young stood his ground and said Vigilant wouldn't back down easily. Jo-han was about to attack him, but then he remembered his conversation with Jun Yap the day before. Jun Yap had said that if Vigilant's identity turned out to be someone good like Ji-young, it would get more support from the public, and Ji-young was a fellow cop. So Jo-han and Jun Yap didn't want the public to find out who Vigilant really was, especially if it turned out to be someone good like Ji-young. That might inspire other young cops to become the new Vigilant. While Ji-young and Jo-han faced off, Gung-ok was secretly watching them both. In the end, Jo-han let Ji-young go, and Ji-young immediately took Young-ji to a restaurant. Ji-young tried to get information about Gung-ok, but Young-ji wouldn't tell anything about Gung-ok's identity. Meanwhile, Ji-young got a call from Gung-ok and answered it outside the restaurant. Gungog asked if Johan now knew Ji Yong's identity, and Ji Yong confirmed it. He also asked Gungog about his true intentions. Gungog replied that he wanted to be Ji Yong's ally and promised to help him with all his problems. Ji Yong agreed to team up with Gungog, but he had one condition, that Gungog had to copy Johan's phone. Gungog smiled because Ji Yong's condition was pretty easy for him. Before they hung up, Gungog mentioned that Johan was just a puppet ruler. Sometime later, Mei Rio and Dae Sok went to a port because they thought Jae Huk often hung around there. When they opened one of the containers, they found lots of computers that Jae Huk might have used for an illegal gambling website. Mei Rio quickly filmed the scene and started looking for information. But suddenly, they were confronted by a guy named Mr. Bung, who was Sumdu's right-hand man. Mei Rio and Dae Sok tried to hide, but Mr. Bung already knew they were there, and he found them quickly. In a cruel way, Mr. Bung killed Dae Sok, while Mei Rio tried to escape by getting into a car. Luckily, Mr. Bung couldn't catch Mei Rio, and she managed to get away from the scene. Not long after, Mei Rio went back to the port with the police. Surprisingly, the place was all cleaned up, and there wasn't a single computer left from what she saw earlier. Even Dae Sok's body had vanished. Mei Rio was amazed at how quickly Mr. Bang had cleared the place. She was now sure that Mr. Bang was working for Sumdu. Meanwhile, Johan was in training. Gungog's claim that Johan was just a puppet ruler turned out to be true because Johan got a call from his boss, Police General Jae-op. Jae-op asked Johan why he hadn't caught Vigilant yet. Johan asked Jae-op to give him some time and promised he'd catch Vigilant soon. Even though Johan knew Ji Yong was Vigilant, he had other plans and didn't want to tell Jae-op. On the other hand, Ji Yong was training with his friends. Shortly after, Ji Yong got a message from Gungog saying he had copied Johan's phone, just like Ji Yong had asked. Gungog also mentioned he stored the phone in a locker at Incheon Station. An hour later, Gungog was seen working hard during his training. He kept pushing himself because he was going to team up with Vigilant. Meanwhile, on his day off, Ji Yong went to the station to get the phone Gungog had left there and took it home. While checking the phone Gungog had given him, Ji Yong got distracted by a news report from Mei Rio. The report talked about the mysterious circumstances of Jae Huk's death and how it was linked to Sumdu. Mei Rio also mentioned that Jae Huk had planned to expose all of Sumdu's crimes before he died. Jae Huk Aslo left a message saying that Sumdu had colluded with high-ranking police officials known as rats. Because of this news, Sumdu, who was relaxing, got a call from a police officer referred to as the Rat, who turned out to be General Jae-op. Jae-op told Sumdu to take immediate action. Thanks to Jae-op's influence, the media company where Mei Rio worked got in trouble because of her news report. Not only that, Mei Rio got suspended from her job as a journalist. On the other hand, Sumdu ordered Mr. Bang to send someone to get rid of Mei Rio. A few hours later, as Mei Rio was about to leave, she was suddenly attacked by the person sent by Mr. Bang. Luckily, Johan happened to be there and saved Mei Rio. Johan told her that if she wanted to stay safe, she shouldn't try to lure Vigilant anymore. After that, Johan dealt with the guy called Son Boom, who had attacked Mei Rio. Johan asked Son Boom who had sent him. At first, Son Boom refused to talk, but Johan started beating him. Eventually, Son Boom confessed that he was sent by a man known as the Hitman, alias Mr. Bang. Later, Johan forced Son Boom to take him to Mr. Bang's hideout. When they got there, Mr. Bang was not around, and only his henchmen were present. Despite being outnumbered, Johan showed them a lesson until none of them were standing. Then the police arrived and secured the location. The next day, following Johan's orders, the police declared that they had captured Vigilant the night before, and there wouldn't be any more Vigilant actions. This meant that the people who got beaten up by Johan the previous night were falsely blamed as Vigilant members. The idea was to make the public believe that Vigilant, the hero they had admired, was just a bunch of criminals. Mei Rio, after seeing the news, thought the police were spreading lies about Vigilant. Ji Yong finally realized that Johan didn't want to catch him, but wanted everyone to think Vigilante was a group of criminals. A few days later, Ji Yong got back to his mission by punishing a criminal who had just been released, coincidentally one of Sum-Du's henchmen. While doing that, Ji Yong stumbled upon a notebook with records of all Sum-Du's assets. Without second thoughts, Ji Yong got rid of the guy. At the same time, Mi Ryo got fired by her boss because he thought her reporting on Vigilant was nonsense. Mi Ryo tried to defend herself, believing that what the police said about Vigilante yesterday was wrong. However, her boss didn't want to hear her out anymore. As Mi Ryo was leaving, she accidentally heard that Vigilant had taken action again. This meant that the police's report about Vigilante yesterday was fake because Vigilant was still active. Mi Ryo felt relieved as this silenced her boss, who had just fired her. Meanwhile, Gung-ok was also impressed with Ji Yong and cheered for him. On the other hand, Sum-Du, who was pretending at a church, got urgent news from his henchmen that Vigilant had taken the notebook with all his assets. Sum-Du panicked and told his subordinates to move all his assets abroad. Meanwhile, Jo-han was on the lookout for Ji Yong. He was really mad because he had gone to great lengths to frame someone else as Vigilant to protect Ji Yong, but Ji Yong had gone back to his vigilant ways. Jo-han was also upset because Ji Yong didn't follow his orders to quit being vigilant. Ji Yong fired back, saying he knew Jo-han wasn't genuinely concerned and was just following someone else's orders. Ji Yong explained that he would always be vigilant as long as the law was unfair. The law had always been easy on the rich and tough on the poor, so Ji Yong would keep punishing criminals who refused to change. Hearing this, Jo-han said that if Ji Yong believed he was the only one doing the right thing, he'd become a demon. Ji Yong attacked Jo-han, but Jo-han, who was stronger, easily cornered him. Jo-han then said he believed if Ji Yong stopped being vigilant, he could become a great police officer, even better than Jo-han himself, instead of becoming a demon. But Ji Yong insisted he didn't care what others thought anymore. If he wanted to fight against demons, he had to become one. Ji Yong challenged Jo-han to show him what true justice was if he wanted Ji Yong to stop. Jo-han didn't expect Ji Yong to be so determined, so he eventually let him go. The next day, Jae-op summoned Jo-han, and it turned out that he wanted to fire Jo-han from his job of catching Vigilant. Jae-op also mentioned he had replaced Jo-han with another police officer. Jo-han believed that Jae-op was firing him not because he couldn't catch Vigilant, but because he was afraid Jo-han would uncover his connection to Sum-Du. Later on, Jo-han went to talk to Sonbum, hoping to find out if Jae-op was also tied to Sum-Du's mafia. However, Sonbum claimed he didn't know, and the person who might have that information was Mr. Bang. Unfortunately, Sonbum had no clue about Mr. Bang's whereabouts. Meanwhile, Ji Yong was getting medical attention and being looked after by Gung-ok because of the beating he took from Jo-han the day before. Gung-ok was really impressed with Ji Yong after witnessing the argument between Jo-han and Ji Yong. He even snapped a photo with Ji Yong, considering him his idol. Afterward, Gung-ok left, allowing Ji Yong to rest. Soon enough, Ji Yong woke up and watched the news, which was typically reported by Mi Ryo. However, this time, the news from the media company was an apology to Sum-Du for damaging his reputation and putting all the blame on Mi Ryo. Seeing this, Ji Yong immediately messaged Gung-ok, asking him to arrange a special broadcasting studio for Mi Ryo. Gung-ok, with his influential status as a conglomerate, easily made it happen. So, Mi Ryo was summoned by Gung-ok and provided with a dedicated studio where she could report freely. Mi Ryo asked Gung-ok why he was doing this. Gung-ok replied that he didn't want to waste what Vigilant had achieved. After that, Mi Ryo promptly started her first report, stating that she would keep exposing the crimes committed by Sum-Du and General Rat. She also made it clear that she would never stop, no matter what. If anything happened to her, it would be evident that someone didn't want her reporting to be known by everyone. General Jae-op and Sum-Du, as they watched Mi Ryo's broadcast, were in a state of panic. They couldn't believe they were being disrupted so severely. Later on, a new police officer named Yin Gil, who was now leading a new team that replaced Jo Hyun. Yin Gil was a smart guy and had martial arts skills almost as good as Jo Hyun's. The following day, Ji Yong, who had recovered, came back home. He tried to open the notebook he had taken from the guy he had eliminated earlier and found out that Sumdu and General Jayop were hiding their assets in a church where Sumdu often put on a show. Without wasting any time, Ji-young rushed to the church and managed to get a flash drive containing evidence of Sumdu's crimes. But while Ji-young was doing this, someone noticed his actions, and he quickly chased after them. It turned out the person was Gung-ok, and he explained that he was just curious about what Ji-young was up to because he really admired him. Then they had a conversation, and Ji-young truly saw Gung-ok as his ally, which made him very happy. Ji-young gave Gung-ok the flash drive he had obtained, asking him to pass it on to Mei-ryo. Before leaving, Gung-ok promised to support Ji-young no matter what. The next day, when Jun-yap entered his office, he was surprised to see Yin-gil already there. Yin-gil explained that he had come to request student data because he suspected that Vigilante might be a police officer. At the same time, Ji-young showed up to let Jun-yap know that the students were waiting for him in the classroom. Yin-gil, upon seeing Ji-young, looked at him seriously and then left, but he mentioned he would be back. On a holiday, Ji-young went to a church with the intention of eliminating the priest named Jong-un, who was one of Sumdu's right-hand men in his criminal activities. After Ji-young successfully took down Jong-un, Vigilante's reputation suffered in the eyes of the public because Jong-un was a well-known and kind-hearted priest. Moreover, Vigilante carried out this act without a clear reason. On the other hand, Sumdu was boiling with anger because Jong-un was the only one who knew where all his hidden assets were. So, Samdu told General Jayop to hold off on any action for the next 5 days because he planned to get rid of Mei-ryo, Vigilante, and Jo-hyun. Samdu believed that Jo-hyun could pose a threat to them. Meanwhile, Mei-ryo met up with Gung-ok to give him a flash drive that Ji-young had passed on to her, explaining why Vigilante had taken out Jong-un. Mei-ryo had a feeling that Gung-ok might already know Vigilante's true identity, but she didn't bring it up. That night, Mei-ryo started broadcasting the reason behind Vigilante's actions against Jong-un. However, just as she was about to reveal the contents of the flash drive Gung-ok gave her, her broadcast was abruptly interrupted, and it turned out to be Jo-hyun. He warned Mei-ryo that if she continued reporting on Sumdu, it could be deadly for her. But Mei-ryo responded that she wasn't naive and understood the risks. Eventually, Jo-hyun decided to leave, and as he was getting into his car, he was suddenly attacked by 2 men. These 2 men were Mr. Bang and one of his highly skilled henchmen. After a fierce fight, Mr. Bang, armed with a sharp weapon, managed to injure Jo-hyun. Just as Mr. Bang was about to finish him off, Vigilante appeared out of nowhere, causing Mr. Bang and his henchmen to flee. The next day, Jo-hyun was seen lying in the hospital. Meanwhile, Gung-ok, who knew that Ji-young had saved Jo-hyun, asked why Ji-young had done it. Ji-young replied that he wanted to make Jo-hyun just like him, a Vigilante who delivered his own form of justice. On the other hand, Samdu was pretty mad at Mr. Bang because he didn't manage to get rid of Jo-hyun. Mr. Bang could only say sorry to Sumdu. That night, it was clear that Sumdu's henchmen were attempting to transfer his virtual money assets. But just as they were doing that, there was an explosion and Ji-young showed up. After Ji-young dealt with them, he took Sumdu's virtual money, just like he usually did. Following this, Mei-ryo immediately went broadcasting live to announce that Vigilante was demanding Sumdu and General Rat to confess all their crimes. If they didn't, Ji-young would donate all the virtual money to every orphanage. Afterward, Ji-young contacted Gung-ok and asked him to protect Mei-ryo because she was sure to become Sumdu's target. Gung-ok agreed right away. While they were talking, Sun-wook secretly watched Ji-young. A bit later, Sumdu's henchmen showed up at the building where Mei-ryo was broadcasting. They were sent to eliminate Mei-ryo, who had just made a broadcast threatening Sumdu and Jayop. Mei-ryo, realizing she was about to be surrounded, quickly set up several cameras in the room. As Sumdu's henchmen were tearing apart Mei-ryo's broadcasting studio, Mei-ryo secretly went live on air. This allowed everyone, including Yin-gil, the head of the regional team who replaced Jo-hyun, to witness what was happening. But eventually, Sumdu's crew caught Mei-ryo, and they smashed her phone, which she used for the broadcast. They were about to take her away for a quick execution when Vigilant suddenly showed up. However, it turned out to be Gung-og, who had come to rescue Mi-ryo on Ji-young's orders. Gung-og mercilessly took them all down, leaving only one of Sum-du's henchmen alive. At first, Mi-ryo suspected that Gung-og might be Vigilant, but Gung-og explained that he was just following Vigilant's orders. Shortly after that, the police led by Yin-gil arrived, but when they entered the broadcasting studio, everything seemed back to normal. Yin-gil then took Mi-ryo to the police station for questioning. On the other hand, Ji-young sneaked out of the dormitory just to make sure Mi-ryo was safe. He felt relieved when he saw that she was safe and with Yin-gil. At the police station, Yin-gil asked Mi-ryo about who had saved her. He suspected that she might have been working with Vigilant all along, and the person who rescued her was Vigilant. However, Mi-ryo simply replied that she didn't know if that person was Vigilant or not, but they had saved her. After being questioned, Mi-ryo went back to her apartment and relaxed with a warm bath, but not long after, her apartment's lights suddenly went out. The next day, while Ji-young was in class, Yin-gil came to talk to him, asking for information. They ended up in Jun-yap's office, and Yin-gil straight up asked Ji-young if he was Vigilant. Ji-young politely questioned why he was being accused and asked for proof. Yin-gil mentioned that Vigilant had a similar build to Ji-young, and data on Jo-han's computer pointed to him. He'd also asked about Ji-young's whereabouts the previous night, knowing he had left the dormitory. Yin-gil suspected Ji-young had gone to rescue Mi-ryo. Ji-young admitted he left the dormitory, but said it was a private matter. Jun-yap tried to defend Ji-young, asking Yin-gil to find strong evidence before accusing him. However, Yin-gil said everything would be revealed soon because the virtual money assets stolen by Vigilant were traced back to the police academy. The Central Police team was tracking it and would reveal everything tomorrow. On the following holiday, Ji-young was seen planning something with Gung-og, but then he got a call from Sun-wook, who hadn't returned from the police academy dormitory. Sun-wook informed Ji-young that Yin-gil and the police were searching all the rooms at the academy. Ji-young couldn't do anything but stay silent. On the other hand, while searching Ji-young's dormitory, Yin-gil was suddenly told by a subordinate that the IT team had pinpointed the phone's location. Surprisingly, it led them to General J-yap's office. Without hesitation, Yin-gil broke into the office to search for evidence. Meanwhile, Ji-young told Gung-og that the police, led by Yin-gil, were searching the academy. He also revealed that he purposely lured Yin-gil by accessing Sum-du's virtual money at the police academy using a special phone General J-yap, typically used to talk to Sum-du. Gung-og was impressed by Ji-young's cleverness. On the other side, Yin-gil finally found the phone. General J-yap entered and caught Yin-gil trying to take his phone. General J-yap dismissed everyone else and wanted a private chat with Yin-gil. General J-yap was worried because he often used that phone to talk to Sum-du. General J-yap offered Yin-gil money or a high-ranking position if he didn't take the phone. But Yin-gil, being an honest cop, said he only wanted to do his duty as a police officer. He also said he would give the phone directly to the special digital forensics team to uncover everything. After Yin-gil left, General J-yap immediately ordered his men to get rid of Yin-gil before he could hand over the phone to the forensics team. Yin-gil was on his way to the forensics office, but not long after, he was suddenly hit by a truck, causing his car to flip over. In the end, Yin-gil met his demise at the hands of General J-yap's henchmen. On the other hand, Jo-han was still recovering from his injuries. It didn't take long before he was told that Yin-gil had passed away. Jo-han felt a deep sense of loss because Yin-gil was a close friend. That same night, Ji-young didn't expect that his plan to trap General J-yap would result in Yin-gil's death. When Ji-young was about to leave, Jo-han suddenly confronted him. Jo-hyun asked Ji-young if he had killed Yin-gil. Ji-young immediately confessed everything to Jo-hyun. But even after hearing the full story, Jo-hyun still urged Ji-young to stop being vigilant. Ji-young replied that if Jo-han wanted to stop him, he should kill him now, and Ji-young wouldn't resist. If Jo-han refused to kill him, then they had to work together to expose all of General J-Op's crimes. Meanwhile, Mr. Bung and his men successfully kidnapped Mai Rio. The next day, Gung Og and his team tried to unlock Mai Rio's apartment because she hadn't been in touch. After opening the door, they were shocked to find the apartment in a mess, realizing that Mai Rio had been abducted. Gung Og immediately contacted Ji Yong to inform him of the situation. Meanwhile, Mai Rio found herself being interrogated by Mr. Bung, who was desperately trying to uncover Vigilant's true identity. However, Mai Rio, who still didn't know about Vigilant's real identity, had nothing to reveal. Not long after, Vigilant proposed a deal to Sumdu. He would exchange Mai Rio for the access to the virtual money he had taken earlier. Sumdu found this offer intriguing, and they agreed to meet at Seoul Stadium the following night. Sumdu then contacted Mr. Bung and instructed him to bring Mai Rio to the stadium. However, Mr. Bang demanded a hefty price for his cooperation, which Sumdu reluctantly agreed to. On the other hand, Ji Yong was busy planning with Gung Og, but little did they know that Sin Wook was secretly spying on them. The next day, Mr. Bang broke the news to Mai Rio that she would be exchanged for access to the virtual money. Mai Rio couldn't help but burst into laughter at the unexpected twist. Not long after, Sumdu and his henchmen arrived early at Seoul Stadium to take control of the CCTV cameras. However, during the exchange night, they were taken by surprise when everyone showed up dressed as Vigilant. There was also a music festival happening inside the stadium. Ji Yong had orchestrated this plan with the help of Gung Og, the wealthy conglomerate who could easily organize festivals with his vast resources. Meanwhile, Mr. Bang and his crew had arrived at the location with Mai Rio. The music festival inside Seoul Stadium had already started. Mr. Bang brought Mai Rio to search for Vigilant, while Sumdu and Mr. Bang observed her from a distance. However, Ji Yong managed to outsmart Mr. Bang, allowing him to take Mai Rio away from the crowd to the parking area. On the other hand, Gung Og intentionally approached Sumdu and his henchmen, luring them into a chase that led to the parking lot. Meanwhile, Ji Yong asked Mai Rio to conduct a live broadcast. Later, Ji Yong climbed on top of a bus to confront Mr. Bang's men. Eventually, Mr. Bang himself arrived to assist his men in their confrontation with Ji Yong. Jo-han watched Mai Rio's broadcast and finally learned about Ji Yong's current actions. Meanwhile, General J-Op was having dinner with his superior, Song Chol. Song Chol was a high-ranking police general with 4 stars. Surprisingly, all of General J-Op's criminal activities were carried out under Song Chol's orders because Song Chol was planning to run for president. Shortly after, Song Chol's men informed him that Vigilant and Sumdu's group were engaged in a fight at Seoul Stadium. Upon hearing this, Song Chol immediately ordered General J-Op to go to the stadium and handle the situation. Back at the scene with Sumdu's group, they had surrounded Gung Og and Ji Yong. Amidst the battle, a car suddenly appeared and rammed into Mr. Bang. Behind the wheel was Jo Hyun, accompanied by Sun Bum and one of their friends. Jo Hyun demanded that Samdu and his men surrender. However, Samdu refused, confident in the large number of henchmen at his disposal, and he immediately ordered them to attack Jo Hyun. Meanwhile, Ji Yong was utterly exhausted, and Sumdu was relentlessly attacking him from close quarters. It seemed Ji Yong was on the brink of being defeated when an unexpected savior intervened. Unfortunately, this act of heroism resulted in the savior being stabbed by Sumdu. Surprisingly, the person who came to Ji Yong's rescue was Sun Wook. Sin Wook had already figured out that Ji Yong was the vigilante. Just then, the police arrived to intervene and stop the conflict. However, Sumdu swiftly made his escape, heading towards an underground chamber. Ji Yong asked Mai Rio to assist Sun Wook, while he pursued Sumdu. Not long after, Ji Yong entered the underground chamber, while Gung Og tried to hold off Sumdu's henchmen who were chasing Ji Yong. Inside the underground chamber, Ji Yong found himself facing off against Sumdu and Mr. Bang. But before long, Jo-han arrived to support Ji Yong. Jo-han confronted Mr. Bang, while Ji Yong engaged in a fierce battle with Sumdu. Their fight was interrupted by the unexpected arrival of General J-Op. General Jayop decided that Sumdu had failed and took swift action to eliminate him. Afterward, he opened a water channel, attempting to drown Ji Yong, Jo-han, and Mr. Bang, and started shooting at them. Fortunately, General Jayop's shots missed their mark. While he was reloading, Ji Yong quickly climbed up and cornered him. Ji Yong managed to subdue General Jayop, but was about to finish him off. However, Jo-han intervened, wanting to bring General Jayop to face justice. Meanwhile, Mr. Bang challenged Ji Yong and Jo-han, leading to a fight between the three of them. Unexpectedly, General Jayop retrieved his pistol and shot Ji Yong, Jo-han, and Mr. Bang. Fortunately, Jo-han was only wounded in the hand, allowing him to approach and eliminate General Jayop without hesitation. The following day, Gung-ok regained consciousness and immediately asked about Ji Yong. His men reassured him that Ji Yong was safe. Meanwhile, Ji Yong mourned the loss of Sun-wook, who tragically died in the previous incident. Mai Ryo confided in Jo-hyun that now it wasn't just Ji Yong who was the vigilant, but also Jo-hyun. The next day, General Song Chol announced that General Jayop had died due to an attack by a criminal group. Ji Yong realized that the mastermind behind all of Sumdu and General Jayop's crimes was General Song Chol. The scene then showing the new police officers, including Ji Yong, were taking their oath. But when it was time to pledge loyalty to the country and their superiors, Ji Yong stayed quiet. And that's how the Vigilant series concluded.